good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you see this. This is Dee with INFP Insights. I'm going to do more than one video today. So if you ever see me wearing the same thing over and over, it's not because I haven't changed clothes. It's because I do several at one time. That's what suits me the best. Today, we are going to be talking about my life as an INTP. If you're new to the channel, welcome. This is everything INFP from someone who, a lot of it's tongue-in-cheek, a lot of it's a grain of salt, but it is true, and it's come from my personal and professional experiences. You're welcome. You don't have to be an INFP. I do have regulars here who are not. And I do welcome everybody. If you're coming back, I appreciate you. So, we're talking today about my life as an INTP. And I know I've talked a lot lately about changing your personality types. Can they be changed? Other creators who have a whole lot more subscribers and followers than me are also wondering this. So I do think I'm doing this during the Mercury retrograde and the full moon. And yes, I do believe in astrology. That's another thing I want to get into a little bit more. But with all of that coming up, yes, we're all kind of thinking alike, and our energies are meshing, I think. I have said previously I've told you all, I have tested recently as an INFP, an INSP, an ENFP, and an INFJ. These were 4 different tests done at the same time, so my mood was the same. So that's what I have. But the first Myers-Briggs test I ever took was right after I got out of grad school, professional school, and the first place where I worked, they did that for everybody. We had a little part of our orientation was to take the MBTI, and then we had to get into groups according to what our signs were. Not signs, I'm doing astrology here, of what the type was, and I was totally depressed. I tested, right after grad school, I tested as an INTP. So that was in my 40s, so from my early 40s until 2 years ago, in my early 70s, so 30 years, I lived my life as an INTP. Or so I thought I was an INTP. So what does that mean, and how did we get there? I would suggest, if you haven't seen any of my other videos about that, to do so, and how I came about thinking it can change, and how you can have different parts of your personality show. It all started, I think, back in my late 30s. I went to law school, and I always wanted to be a lawyer. I love forensics, actually. I wouldn't mind being a forensic psychologist, but I do love forensics. I do love the FBI kind of shows. I do love, everybody's told me I should be in the CIA, that type of thing. So I did go to law school for 1 semester. I'll get into that a little bit later. If you don't know anything about law school, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy the school part, but we had to read, it's reading, and we had to read about 300 pages of cases a day. And I went to a school like most law schools here in the States. They go by case studies. That's how you learn law. So you read all about the cases, and then the next day you need to be prepared to discuss them. So we would have about 300 pages of law to read a day, and then the next day your professor would call on you. You'd stand up, and they'd ask a question, just like you were at trial, and they'd ask you a question, and you had to come up with an answer based on the case study and mention the cases. Yet, I mean, it wasn't just one case we read for 300 pages. It was a ton of cases, and have to come up with thinking fast on your feet. So you had to think. There was no FI involved in there at all. There was no heart involved at all. There's no heart in law. And it shouldn't be. It should be fair. Should be non-judgmental. It's not becoming that way now, but that's the way it's designed to be. I did love the school part. I didn't like the mechanics of it. I did very well. Fortunately, I was able to take constitutional law, was one of my subjects, and then I had civil law. I didn't really care about civil law at all, but the con law I loved. It's coming in handy with what's going on around the globe now, because I have a reference for a lot of that. But yeah, and I did really well. The only reason I lasted a semester, and it was kind of because every night I would go and read my 300 pages, and I was a single mom of 3 small kids at that time too. I had to drive an hour one way to get to the school, and I did that every day, 5 days a week. So I would be cooking dinner I had a law book in one hand and reading, and cooking dinner with the other hand, standing over the stove, and it was attached to my hip, the law book. Took it with me. It was kind of funny. I wish I had some pictures of all that. But that's what I had to do. The reason I only stayed one semester was because this was a very conservative school. It's a good school, but a very conservative religious school, which was not very conducive for an INFP personality. But yeah, I was called into the associate dean's office, and I did better than they thought I was going to do. I think they were hoping I was going to flunk out, but I was near the top of my class, actually. And he brought me in to talk to me and suggested that I quit. And his reasoning was that he didn't think I could be fair in court because I was a divorced woman, was what he told me. So I just looked at him and I said, "Are you telling me that there are no divorced men lawyers?" And so we had a tete-a-tete, whatever you want to call it. But I only stayed one semester. I decided that it was not for me. The profession was not for me. It's too male-oriented. I love law still. So I left there, which was all thinking and no processing and no way around it, no way of imagining something different. You have to go by the law, but there's a little creativity in that, but not much creativity. So I left after one semester, and I went to a professional program, master's level professional program in social work. I liked social work because you could be anything. You can do any kind of job and be a social worker, and I like the policy end of it. You could be a clinical worker, you could be a policy worker, or a combination. So I went into social work. That school, I had to go 2 hours one way with 3 kids. So I left the house at 6:30 in the morning. I got home about 11:30 at night and did an internship during all that time. I had to write a master's thesis and this, that, and the other. So getting a little bit long. But how I got to be an INTP is that there's no room for, the school I went to was totally research oriented, not much clinical work. It was a brand new master's level school. It was a 2-year professional school. They just about killed us. Every class we had to do a research paper. Most people did a 20-page research paper, but me being me and being the INFP, that had turned into an INTP because you can't feel anything. Again, there's no room for feeling. You have to do, when you're doing research, you have to think. So I was totally cut off from my body. My head and body were totally separated. It got to the point where I could not do a 20-page research paper for each of my classes. I had to do a 40 to 50-page one. I got so involved, and yes, I waited till the last day. If it was due on Monday, I put it together the weekend before, sent the kids to their dad's house. I shut up the house. I had everything lying out on the on the dining room table, just copies. I mean, this was back before the internet. Actually, it was before the internet. We had floppy disk. You know what a floppy disk? People didn't have PCs back then, but it was floppy disk. And I had all the paperwork and copies laid out all across everywhere, and coming up with my own theories. I came up with my own theories. I came up with all this kind of stuff. And I put a paper together. And I did quite well. When I did my master's thesis, I decided I would evaluate. Now, this is the kind of the INFP part coming in, or the ENFP, whatever you want to say. I decided to evaluate the program because I thought they were killing us, which they were. There was 1 or 2 people in there who had tried to commit suicide, and they were in the hospital for quite a while. So I didn't think that was fair, and that was good or fair, and that went against my values. So again, it's kind of, even though I tested as INTP, I was acting like an INFP, in that the INFP was trying to come out, but the school stomped on it all the time. They just kept stomping. They kept stomping. I kept quitting every week. They kept telling me to come back and be quiet. So I did. And doing internships too. They were not where I wanted to be. It was really hard. But for my master's thesis, what I decided to do was to evaluate the program. I did it on stress. So I learned stress and social support. So that's a big thing for me, what I like to do. And it wasn't enough to get a tool, a research tool that somebody else had devised. I decided to devise my own and to make sure it was statistically significant. I'm laughing now because I had to do it all myself. I had to be creative. I was not going to do what somebody else did. All of my professors were saying, just graduate. Why don't you just graduate? Just do what everybody else does. Everybody else, I found out, wrote like a 20-page thesis. Again, they just threw a little something together. Did a study of maybe 10 people. I don't know. I did the program, and it got to the point that my professor that I used as my lead professor to help me with the thesis was very intellectual, and he was very much, I would say he was probably an INTJ, and he was very much into his head, or maybe an ISTJ. So I picked him because I thought he was the only one that would understand what I was trying to do. But when I would go meet with him, he really didn't understand. One day I walked in, and on his blackboard in his office, he had my theory and my thesis, and he had all kinds of stuff of mine written on his board. And then when I went in, he said, "Give me about 10 minutes. I've got to wrap my brain around what you're trying to do." And I thought, oh my gosh, he even doesn't understand. I understood perfectly what I was trying to do, but even he didn't understand what I was trying to do. It was so intellectual. Not to say it was great. I mean, it was, I think, but not to say I'm any different. But over a period of those 3 years of law school, and then going through what I went through with the professional school for 2 years, I basically was cutting off all of my fields, and I had to cut. I was still procrastinating, but I was getting a lot done. It got to the point where it was a good study, and the school took it to heart, and they had a meeting about it. Turned out well. It got published. Other schools had meetings about it. It was referenced in a lot of refereed journals and articles, which I was surprised about. All I wanted to do was my little thing. So, yeah, it it got to the point where I was being fed by information. I did not know if I was really eating food or not eating food. So make a short story long, as I tend to do, I would just say the next year after that, I had a total collapse. Total collapse at work. Was in the hospital and was told stop thinking so much. And I went into therapy then too, because I had not realized how much into my head I was, and that I was, people say, there's a saying like, feed your head. You've got to have that balance. You can feed your head, but you've got to feed your body, you've got to feed your heart, you got to feed your soul, you've got to feed all of it around. And then when I did test, on my first MBTI test, it was an INTP. And I did not resonate with any of those because they were scientists where I worked, because I worked in healthcare. They were all scientists, they were researchers, they were very loners. I liked being around people. I thought, this is not me. And I had to take a lot of inventory into who I really was and what I was doing, because I was not aware of that. So I guess the moral of this story, if you hung with me this far, and I know most of you have clicked off, but I appreciate those who stay with me, is just be careful of that. Be careful of your thinking. When we get our thinking going, we can actually literally cut ourselves off from your body. Now, medically speaking, I was told my head was cut off from my body, but I'll go out of the medical realm and I'll just say, you got to get into your feelings, you got to get into your values, you got to get into what's right for you. Your energy has got to be right. You've got to have that balance in life. You can feed your head to the point of it totally shuts down the rest of you, and your body will shut down because you're not feeding it. And I could not tell you back then the last time I had a meal, because I was thriving on all this information that I had. And it was total information overload, which an INFP should not have information overload. But I was loving it. And I was loving it to the point of an obsession, probably. I wasn't labeled as that. I was labeled as having anxiety. Any older woman here in the United States is going to get an anxiety diagnosis. I'll just tell you that. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that. That's my life, and this is way longer than I wanted it to be. That was my life as an INTP. It did not work. Professionally, it worked really well. Personally, it totally was a disaster. And it took 30 years for me to come to know who I really am. And I will say it was hanging out with INFJs have helped that. That FE of theirs has really helped bring out my FI. So I am thankful for that. So I just want to mention that. And again, I hope everybody's safe. I hope everybody enjoyed, well, not everybody enjoy this. Like I said, like, unlike, comment if you'd like. What are your experiences, if you've had any with this? So I just wanted to give this another part of my life, that I was an INTP for quite a while. It was a disaster, personally speaking, medically speaking. I was not happy at all. But now I'm an INF probably, but INTP is not part of my probably. So until next time, stay safe.